I want you to imagine a world that has been just completely and utterly devastated by World War III.
Right, like the Earth as we know it is basically gone.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And in its place is this sprawling post-apocalyptic wasteland that the survivors simply call the Lost Lands.
And out there in the dust, humanity is functionally extinct. I mean, save for a few wanderers.
Yeah, almost everyone left alive is clinging to survival inside this one remaining heavily fortified city. So today's deep dive is a comprehensive, full spoiler review of this incredible sci-fi fantasy movie.
And we've been poring over the original screenplay, the director's notes, even the official lore Bibles to really pull apart the mechanics of this world.
Yeah, we want to bypass the standard summary and just look at the underlying political philosophy, the, surprisingly grounded magic system.
And the character psychology that's kind of hidden beneath the surface of the plot.
Um,
To really understand the stakes, though, we have to look at the sociology of this final city. You have this vast, ruined world outside, but inside the walls, society is entirely paralyzed by a ruthless authoritarian power struggle.
Right.
The Patriarch and the Church, they maintain order through absolute fear. They conduct these brutal public witch hunts.
hmm
And, from a sociological standpoint, it makes sense for a fragile post-apocalyptic government.
Because when resources are scarce, an authoritarian regime needs an internal enemy, right,
Oh,
to
yeah.
distract the populace.
The church has basically decided that magic is that enemy, which allows them to violently purge anyone who threatens their monopoly on control.
Which brings us to our two primary players who exist on completely opposite ends of this world spectrum. First, we have Grey.
The illusionist.
Right. She's an illusionist, which puts her at the very top of the church's hit list. I mean, if the church relies on controlling the narrative, an illusionist is someone who can literally make people see a different reality that's their greatest threat.
Yeah, and we actually meet her at the noose. It's literally her execution day.
But rather than panic, she casts an illusion that tricks one of the church's own guards into taking her place on the scaffold.
Oh, it's wild. The guard dies and she just slips into the shadows.
And then, far away from all the city's politics, we have Boyce. He's this lone wanderer out in the desolate Lost Lands. He's armed with guns and traveling with a highly venomous two-headed pet snake.
As you do in the apocalypse.
Right. But he is entirely adapted to a world that the city dwellers are just terrified of. Okay, let's unpack this. Because we have a fugitive witch hiding from an authoritarian regime and a heavily armed wanderer out in the dirt. How do these orbits collide?
Well, the catalyst is a secret royal bounty. And not from the church, mind you, but from the monarchy.
Right.
Behind the back of the Patriarch, and even behind the back of her own sickly king, the Queen is quietly making a play for power.
And she secretly tracks down Grey, who again is the city's most wanted fugitive, and hires her.
She pays Grey in solid gold. The job is to venture into the monster-infested Lost Lands, track down a shapeshifter, and return with its heart by the next full moon.
But the political machinery immediately complicates things.
Oh, of course. A royal loyalist named Geraris intercepts Grey. He tries to bribe her with even more gold to ensure the Queen receives the heart.
He frames it as an act of loyalty, but
But it's clearly a bureaucratic middleman trying to control the executive branch.
yeah, exactly. And all the while, the church deploys their most relentless executioner, known as the Enforcer, to hunt Grey down for escaping the hanging. I gotta pause here, though, because the logic of this decision seems really flawed on Grey's part.
How so?
Well, she is running for her life from the church, which is deeply intertwined with the monarchy. Why take a contract from the Queen at all? It feels like signing a predatory corporate contract.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. She's basically taking a freelance gig from the CEO of a company while the HR department is actively trying to have her assassinated. Why not just flee the city entirely and leave the gold behind?
Well, that's where the lore of the magic system becomes crucial. It isn't just a gig. It's a biological and magical non-compete clause.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the lore Bibles explain that Grey's specific type of magic comes with a curse. She physically and psychologically cannot refuse a job once she accepts the payment.
Oh, wow.
The moment her fingers touch the Queen's gold, a binding contract was etched right into her biology. She can't walk away, she can't quit, and she cannot fail without it killing her.
She has zero institutional power in this city, so she has to navigate these massive corrupt factions using, like, leverage and technicalities.
Exactly.
So she's literally a prisoner to her own work. That explains why she desperately needs a guide to get this over with quickly, which leads her to a grimy trading post on the edge of the wasteland to find Boyce.
And the movie uses this introduction to really contrast the wasteland with the city.
Yeah, because before Gray can even speak to Boyce, a group of corrupt soldiers try to ambush him to steal his gear.
And Boyce just casually tosses his two-headed snake at them.
It's so cool. The creature bites one soldier, jumps to the next, and ends the fight in seconds.
What's fascinating here is the ideological contrast the narrative is building. Inside the fortified, quote-unquote, civilized city, everyone is using everyone else.
Right. The Queen, Geraris, the Patriarch, they all operate through subtext, bribery, and backstabbing.
The city is just a place of irredeemable, sophisticated corruption. But the Lost Lands, ironically, are presented as a much more honest ecosystem.
Out there, the threats look you in the eye.
Yeah. A two-headed snake doesn't pretend to be your friend before it bites you. It's a brutal world, sure, but it lacks the hypocrisy of the city.
But that honesty is put to the test immediately, because the city's hypocrisy comes hunting for them anyway. The Enforcer doesn't care about the Queen's bounty or the political nuance.
No, this executioner is just the blind, blunt instrument of the state.
The Enforcer relentlessly pursues Gray and Boyce into the wasteland, even going so far as to torture and kill Boyce's only friends, Mara and Zaros, just to find their trail.
Which is brutal. And this forces Gray and Boyce entirely off the map. They have to take a shortcut through highly dangerous territory just to lose their pursuer.
And that shortcut requires crossing an old, rusted cable car station suspended over a massive ravine.
The tactical mechanics of this sequence are brilliant, honestly, because it forces Gray to finally show her hand.
Right. They are pinned down by the Enforcer's men. Bullets are flying everywhere. The cable car is falling apart over a fatal drop.
They are completely outgunned and outmaneuvered. The Enforcer is standing over them with a sniper rifle, just ready to end the pursuit.
Right, and Gray can't fight back physically. So she projects a visual and auditory illusion so flawless that the Enforcer genuinely believes she just pulled the trigger and watched their bodies fall into the ravine.
The Enforcer packs up and leaves, fully believing the state's problem is solved.
Which buys them time to enter the deeper part of the shortcut, a sector called Shadow Bane. And I want to rely on your reading of the lore here because this area operates on a completely different set of rules.
Oh, absolutely. Shadow Bane is essentially a geographic graveyard of greed.
Okay.
According to the director's notes, it is inhabited by monsters that used to be human treasure hunters. Long ago, they scoured the ruins of the old world for riches and were cursed by a mysterious, ancient entity named Asthea.
Asthea punished their obsession with physical wealth by stripping away their humanity. Right?
Exactly, turning them into mindless beasts that are entirely impervious to physical damage.
Yeah.
Bullets bounce off them. Knives do nothing.
Because their curse was born of physical materialism, physical weapons cannot harm them.
Yeah, so when Gray and Boyce take shelter in an old ruin, a pack of these creatures swarms them. Boyce empties his weapons into them to zero effect.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When physical force fails, Gray has to use her illusions. They pour gasoline around their position. When the monsters attack, Gray ignites the fuel, but she doesn't just create a wall of real fire.
Right, she uses her magic to hack the monsters' nervous systems.
She projects this overwhelming, hyper-vivid illusion directly into their minds that the flames have engulfed them. It's exactly like being strapped into a hyper-realistic virtual reality nightmare.
That's a great way to think about it.
If you are wearing a VR headset and the simulation convinces you that you're standing in a blazing inferno, the digital fire can't singe your skin. But if your brain is entirely convinced you are burning alive, your body's physiological response kicks in.
Yeah, the sheer terror triggers a massive adrenaline spike.
Sending the body into shock to the point where the heart physically gives out. Gray isn't burning them to death. She is weaponizing their own perception so effectively that their biology shuts down.
It completely recontextualizes the magic system. It isn't about conjuring elements out of thin air like a traditional fantasy wizard.
No, it is a psychological weapon.
If you can control what an organism believes is real, you control its biology. You bypass its physical armor by attacking its perception. It elevates Gray to a master psychological manipulator.
Which is a skill she absolutely needs because while she's fighting these VR-induced heart attack monsters, the political situation back in the city goes from a Cold War to a total meltdown.
Oh yeah, things get messy.
The Queen, who we learn is pregnant, decides to accelerate her timeline. She suffocates her sick husband, the king, with a pillow.
And we have to look at the motivation behind the regicide here. The Queen isn't just clearing the throne for the king's heir. She is clearing it because the unborn child isn't the king's.
Right.
The lore reveals the queen and Boyce had a secret affair before Boyce was exiled to the Lost Lands.
Wait, so Boyce is the father?
Boyce is the father. So the queen's actions are driven by the ultimate sunk cost fallacy. She has risked everything, allied with a fugitive witch and now murdered a monarch, all to secure a future built on a hidden truth.
And nature abhors a vacuum. The moment the king is dead, Juraris makes his move. The royal loyalist mobilizes his private forces and slaughters the Patriarch's men, crippling the church's military infrastructure.
The streets literally run with blood as the factions openly war for the scraps of the monarchy.
But the deep irony is that while the city is tearing itself apart over who gets to wear a crown, the actual climax of the story is happening far away, out in the dirt of a place called Skullville.
Skullville is this desolate, bone-littered basin in the wasteland. It's where Gray and Boyce finally arrive on the night of the full moon.
Which is the exact deadline for Gray's contract.
Exactly. The moon rises, and the story delivers its central twist. The monstrous shapeshifter the Queen paid Gray to hunt down is not some random beast. It is Boyce.
The man she's been relying on, the man she survived Shadow Bane with, violently transforms into a towering werewolf.
It's a crazy reveal.
But what's brilliant about the script is that Gray isn't shocked. She doesn't have a moment of betrayal. She already figured it out.
Yeah, the ensuing fight is brutal because Boyce, in his wolf form, is an apex predator. He is physically unstoppable.
But Gray never enters an engagement without having already rigged the outcome.
And the preparation is entirely hidden in plain sight. Mid-fight, Boyce suddenly falters. His overwhelming strength just evaporates.
And then the film flashes back to a quiet, seemingly intimate moment days earlier. Boyce had a deep cut on his arm, and Gray was patching it up for him.
As she sewed his skin back together, she intentionally used a thread spun from pure silver.
She literally stitched his kryptonite directly into his bloodstream. She knew he was the target, and she knew silver was the only biological weakness of a shapeshifter.
It weakened him from the inside out, just sitting dormant until his heart rate spiked during the transformation. It gives her just enough of a tactical advantage to bring him down.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the tragedy of Gray's magic system truly hits home.
Because you have to ask, why sew the thread? Why not just walk away in the night when she realized her friend was the bounty?
Because of the curse we discussed earlier.
Right. She couldn't walk away. Once the Queen's gold touched her hand back in the city, she was biologically locked into a fight to the death with the shapeshifter.
The silver thread wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of grim inevitability. She was a prisoner to a contract she never wanted to fulfill.
She had to finish the job.
So as the sun rises, Gray does the unthinkable. She seemingly kills Boyce, extracts the heart, and makes the long, solitary trek back to the gates of the city to claim her bounty and lift the curse.
But delivering this heart is not the end of the transaction. Dropping that heart into the political ecosystem is like dropping a lit match into a powder keg.
It's the collapse of an entire societal structure. Gray bypasses the chaotic streets and delivers the heart to Juraris.
Juraris, believing he has outmaneuvered everyone, brings the heart to the Queen in the throne room. He expects her to be thrilled that the monster is dead.
Instead, she is utterly broken.
The screenplay unravels the Queen's true motivation here. She didn't want the shapeshifter dead to protect the realm. She wanted the heart so she could consume it through a dark ritual.
She wanted to absorb its magic and become a shapeshifter herself. That is such a profound indictment of her environment. The Queen of Humanity's last city looks at her life of immense wealth and power and decides she would rather become a literal monster and live in the irradiated dirt with Boyce than spend another day ruling the humans.
She just wanted to transform and run away with him.
But Juraris manipulated the entire contract.
He knew Boyce was the werewolf, and he knew about the affair. Juraris orchestrated the bounty so that Boyce would be permanently eliminated, trapping the Queen in the city with him.
He thought he was playing a masterstroke of political strategy.
But he severely miscalculated human emotion. In a moment of absolute blinding grief, the Queen stops playing the political game entirely. She pulls a knife and murders Juraris right there in the throne room.
And the chaos trickles down. While the ruling class is literally bleeding out on the marble floors of the palace, the enslaved underclass of the city finally breaks.
They've watched the church lose its military. They've seen the chaos in the monarchy.
But more importantly, they remember Gray. They remember the illusionist who stood on the scaffold, looked at the executioner, And vanished.
They use her name as a symbol of defiance to spark a full-scale revolution. They tear down the religious monuments, storm the palace, and dismantle the authoritarian regime brick by brick.
But the narrative has one final card to play. We cut away from the burning city all the way back to the quiet, dusty expanse of Skullville.
The camera pans down to the grave where Gray buried Boyce. The dirt shifts. A hand breaks the surface. Boyce is alive.
So what does this all mean? How is he breathing?
Gree didn't kill him. She faked his death.
She procured an animal heart, likely from one of the wasteland creatures, and used her illusion magic to disguise it as Boyce's.
She leaned into the literal, legalistic wording of her curse. The magic bound her to deliver a heart, to fulfill the contract. Didn't care about the intent, it only cared about the transaction.
Wow.
She provided a heart, satisfying the magical parameters that bound her biology, which freed her from the curse while allowing Boyce to survive.
She weaponized her own subjugation. She looked at these politicians who view people as disposable assets, and she gave them exactly what they asked for. Knowing the truth of it would rot their foundation.
She used Juraris's jealousy and the Queen's desperation as the ultimate illusion.
She didn't have to burn the city down, she just handed them the match.
It is a remarkable piece of narrative engineering. I mean, you start with a premise that looks like a standard video game fetch quest. Go to the Badlands, kill the beast, collect the gold. But it operates as a sophisticated teardown of institutional power.
Every politician in the city thinks they are the main character moving the pieces on the board, but they're completely outplayed by an independent contractor who understands how to exploit the rules of their own system.
It makes you completely reevaluate the framing of the story. And this raises an important question, one the film masterfully leaves hanging for the audience.
Wow.
Well, when you step back and look at the sociology of this entire world, you have a literal, shape-shifting werewolf who, despite his terrifying nature, proves to be the most steadfast, honest character in the story.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you have highly educated human politicians, dressed in silk, who spend every waking moment lying, extorting, and murdering each other for a fleeting grasp on power.
So whether you are out in the untamed wasteland or standing behind the high civilized walls of the city who are the real monsters,
Exactly.
it's a question that applies far beyond the fiction of the Lost Lands. Think about that the next time an institution tries to tell you exactly who the bad guy is. We'll leave you with that thought to mull over. Until next time.